You good there? Okay. The sound system wasn't that great, so we're going to have to go through a few of the questions again just to make sure we're all putting out you, in your line of attack against Mrs. Moore, kept using the phrase that you want to draw some clear distinctions. What is the biggest distinction you want to make?
I think the biggest distinction is Mrs. Moore's campaign believes that the government can create jobs and that more government spending is a solution to our problems. She supports the stimulus bill that passed that spent over $800 billion in tax money we don't have, borrowing money from our future generations. And I think it's a clear choice for voters. Do they want a candidate like Stephanie Moore who's going to grow the size of government, who's going to tax more and spend more and run up the deficit for our future, or a candidate like myself who supports growth in the private sector, helping small businesses on their way out, and removing barriers to success back here in Texas.
You mentioned Nancy Pelosi at least a dozen times. Who are you really running against here?
Well, we're running against Stephanie Moore and the politicians and the broken promises that are coming out of Washington. She knows that her first vote in Washington is going to be to re-elect Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. I don't think that's consistent with what the voters in this district want. And so if the voters want to send someone to vote for Nancy Pelosi, they need to vote for Stephanie Moore. If they want to send someone else who's not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi, then they should vote for me. And that's a clear choice, and it's one of the most important votes we'll take in Washington this year is who you support for Speaker.
She also criticized your tenure in the House, especially there at the end with the education bill, and saying that it would have raised property taxes. How do you feel about her taking on that issue?
Well, we worked hard to balance a budget without raising taxes. Her answer to that problem and every problem is higher taxes and higher spending. We think the government has to live within its means, and so I think it's another clear distinction of where she would stand and where we would stand on these types of issues.
And clear up for us, what is your debating background? I've heard a lot of different things about you. You won some debate things back when you were younger. What's your actual?
Well, I like to talk about issues, and certainly I've had a lot of opportunity in the legislature to discuss the issues that are important to voters in this district, and so this is another opportunity really to show where we stand and where the.
But I mean specifically, like, did you win a state championship? Was that high school, college? What was your?
I was involved in high school debate.
So do you think that gave you an advantage today?
I don't think so. I think Ms. Moore's very capable of holding it.
Could you clarify just for a moment, when they got to the part about what would it take to commit, what would you be satisfied for committing troops overseas? You said rely on the commanders in the field, but can you, again, kind of clarify what would you personally want to see?
Well, first of all, it's the executive, the commander-in-chief, that can commit troops in that regard. Congress has a role in that process. They have to vote in certain situations, but we're pretty premature to start talking about hypothetical scenarios related to how Congress should vote in certain situations. My role and my responsibility will always be to relay all the information we have available to us. And at the end of the day, my trust and faith lies with our commanders on the ground who know what's happening and know how to keep us safe.
Kevin, why did you repeatedly refer to the Speaker of the House as opposed to Stephanie?
Well, we referred to both because they're very well linked.
But it's over a dozen times. It was either the current Congress, the current leadership, or Nancy Pelosi, or the Speaker.
Well, because Stephanie Moore is going to Washington to support the very same policies that Nancy Pelosi is supporting. Her very first vote is going to be a vote to re-elect Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. So this election is very much a referendum on those policies and what's happening in Washington. I don't believe the people of this district want to see Nancy Pelosi re-elected as Speaker of the House. That's going to be who she's going to vote for in her very first vote. It's a very significant thing because the Speaker is going to control the agenda. And Stephanie Moore and Nancy Pelosi stand for the same liberal agenda that wants to increase taxes, run up the deficit, and grow the size of government. And it's central to the distinction that's important for voters to understand in this race.
The Moore campaign says that in your career in Topeka, that you raised taxes, you voted for sales tax increases, and that your career in Topeka represents sales tax increase votes that you're now opposing in the fall campaign.
Well, we worked hard, if you'll remember, in this budget to reduce.
Talking about over your career.
We worked hard to reduce the size of government, cut spending. In fact, I've cut more spending than any budget chairman in state history. So I've led on the issue of cutting spending. I've been in that arena. I've fought the special interest groups, and I have credibility on cutting spending and reducing the size of government. I did it here in Kansas, and I will go to Washington and do the same thing.
Have you voted for tax increases during your career in the legislature?
I have made a lot of votes. We probably cast hundreds and hundreds of votes.
Yes or no,
but I oppose increasing taxes in Washington. I will fight them every step of the way. Stephanie will support them.
But you did vote for tax increases as a legislator.
Mike, you're going to have to go and research the record on votes. There's hundreds and hundreds of votes out there. There's hundreds of votes out there, Mike. The important thing, and this is what politicians want to do in Washington every time, is distort the issue. This is what Stephanie wants you guys to do, is to take the focus off of the future. The future's in Washington. We heard very many times today and Stephanie wants to increase cap and trade tax. She wasn't sure about the Bush tax cut. She was listening to different folks. She wasn't sure what to do. She talked several times about how she was going to support spending more money and raising taxes. That's what's important to voters. I've got a clear record on reducing spending. That's what voters want to see. That's what we've done, and that's what I'll go to Washington to do.
Thanks, guys. Kevin, let's talk about the taxes that she was talking about. She said she would extend Bush tax cuts.
Well, actually, if you listen to what she said, I'm listening to folks on different sides of that issue. I think she said she probably would. We don't know how she'll vote on that issue, and that's one of the very many uncertain things that this current Congress is doing in Washington. They're creating uncertainty by not being clear. Let me be very clear. I don't want to go to Washington and raise taxes on one American family. She stated several times today, whether it was the cap and trade tax or other taxes, the estate tax she said she would consider raising, the death tax. That's one of the most unpopular taxes in this country. So she certainly believes that Washington needs more of our money, and I don't.
Kevin, just
Let's talk about FMAP. She noted that you opposed that FMAP. Why did you oppose it? Can you
Well,
explain
I don't
that?
think we can borrow more money from our grandchildren. I don't think we can borrow more money for the future to send more money to states to bail them out.
So would you vote in Congress to close those loopholes? Just spend the money differently?
Absolutely. I do not support outsourcing, and she's absolutely taking that out of context. It's something that's never been discussed in any form until today's debate. I think I've been very clear on that. And in fact, the policy she's supporting, the cap and trade tax, will be the very sort of thing that drives businesses overseas and outsources more jobs.
when it comes to controlling federal government spending, is the Defense Department budget hands off?
Yes.
What would you cut then?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is stop growing the size of government. You know, this year in the legislature, while I was working to reduce the size of government, free spending, they actually passed the biggest tax increase in state history, which apparently Stephanie supports because she's opposing where we are on the budget. And they actually grew the size of government 3.8%. Every year in Washington, they're growing and growing the size of government. If you went back to the 2008 levels for all spending except for defense on discretionary spending, you could cut $100 billion out of the budget.
There's nothing in the Department of Defense you think merits a cut?
I think we have to do it. I mean, I think they can maybe reprioritize money and make sure they're using it most efficiently. But I don't think going in and cutting defense spending is the way to solve our nation's crisis.
But even the defense
part of the
secretary is
answer?
saying
Is it
he
part of
wants
the
to
answer?
cut a lot of
Is
spending
it
out
part of the
federal
answer,
government.
though?
No, I don't believe so. I think our
Hands off the Defense
I think
Department
part of the problem is Washington politicians try to do so many things and then they want to blame it on defense spending. Do you know we spent more money, Washington did, on the stimulus bill? It spent over $800 billion than they spent on all the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan trying to keep this country safe. We're spending so much money on projects, important projects around this country that congressmen are putting into place through earmarks and pork barrel spending, and that money is bankrupting the budget. It's not the Defense Department's fault.
But even the Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, says that there is room to cut and make major cuts in the Defense Department.
I think there is room to reprioritize certainly how we spend some of that money. We need to make sure we keep our troops safe. We need to make sure we're spending it appropriately. But I don't think attacking defense spending and attacking the safety of our nation is the way to balance our budget.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Yep.